It's the Courtroom War Podcast. I'm your host, Andre Jacobs. With us today is a guest on Oprah Winfrey, expert extraordinaire, Dr. Jolie Brams out of Columbus, Ohio. How you doing, Dr. Jolie?
See in your face, I'm doing great, Andre.
So why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself? I'm so excited to have you here. I've been telling everybody I'm about to have somebody on a podcast who actually met Oprah.
Yes, but I'd like to say I've done more important things than meeting Oprah. It was wonderful. I mean, when you do something like that, all these life experiences give you an opportunity to learn how to communicate, to see the world. And, one part of I'm a forensic psychologist. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But one part of providing services to the court and understanding people is to have life experiences. And one of the things that I talk to young people about how do you end up helping people? Part of it is professional skills, but part of it, Andre, is a worldliness. You've got to really get out there and talk to people and meet people and think about people. You have to put yourself in other people's shoes. You can't live their life, but you can go to their homes. You can read the New York Times. You can read the Washington Post. You can think about things, become educated. So that's something we just started talking about here. But I think that when you bring up the Oprah thing, people look at it as like fame. To me, it's an honor, but it's also was just one of many opportunities that I used to try to do my job better.
Mm-hmm. Now,
Mm-hmm.
people like it's the same thing. I experienced the same thing. Like, oh, Dr. Brahms? Like, yeah, but like it's to me, it's more what the value that you gave to me, the lessons that you gave to me is what matters to me the most. I think it's always like people on the outside that look in see it that way, but to the people who are involved, it's
Yeah.
the real value that you get out of the encounter.
Okay. So we talk about your life, and I'm sure people listening to this podcast know that you have an incredible story to tell. So I sit here as a forensic psychologist, a forensic psychologist, Andre, for those who may not know, although I think most of your listeners know, is a specialty of psychology where we take what we know about human behavior and we address what we call psycholegal issues. We have to address mental health, developmental, sociocultural issues in a way that's framed so the court can understand and accept those findings in a way in their own framework. So when I talk to you, you tell me I'm a learning experience, you're a learning experience. I have to be able to talk to a court as to what do people need to do better in their lives, to be released and be safe, to have certain sentences, to get certain treatment. And the more people I know, I start to understand about outcome. And obviously, Andrea, you're an amazing story because you came into this situation with little and you've come out to be just a shining star of what people can be. You're an exception to the rule. You are an exception to the rule. My job is generally, I don't see people that are going to be exceptions, but I see people who have futures and I see people who have value. And the purpose of what I feel my purpose is to show the trier of fact. That's a very fancy word for a judge, a magistrate, a jury, any trier of fact, to understand that what they're dealing with is a person. And when they weigh sentences and they weigh outcomes, they have to weigh that person. And the only way to do that is to understand that person. So, how do you understand that? You understand that by finding someone to evaluate, get to know that individual and their culture and their family and their history, not just a snapshot. We'll talk about that and present that in a psycholegal format that the court can use. And that's a heck of a job. That is, I have to tell you, that is something that in my life, it is fascinating. It's intellectually challenging. It's one thing to assess somebody and say, okay, this person's depressed. The court doesn't particularly care, nor does a jury care if someone's depressed. They want to know how this person got to the point of committing an offense and what do they do with that person. In order to do that, it's not a diagnosis, it's understanding that person in total. And that, I think, is what people have to start thinking about in our justice system is
Mm-hmm.
that these are people, Andre. You're a person. Nobody treated you like a person. Nobody really thought about your potential. No one saw you locked up and said, this man is brilliant. This man can change the world. No one ever looked at you justice wise, at least in my view, as an individual. Would you agree with that?
I agree with you. I
Yes.
mean, I feel like, um, if you come from a certain background, then people just have this idea that, they could just write you off or throw you away. And if, somebody doesn't come along, somebody like
Mm-hmm.
yourself or people like you that do the work that you do,
Mm-hmm.
um, to actually say, well, hold on, there is something here. Oh, let's look at it this way. Let's look more into it. Or like you said, like, this person's life is not just a snapshot. It's not just this information that came to you by way of the police or by way of
Mm-hmm.
a written document or whatever the case may be. Yeah. I mean, so
Yeah.
do you feel like attorneys understand the significance of the type of services that you provide?
I think that there's some attorneys I deal, I'm sort of like the TripAdvisor of attorneys. I deal with some attorneys that are five-star attorneys. Okay. They're the best of the best, and working with them is an incredible experience. And I work with a sizable portion of, I would say, above average attorneys. And then unfortunately, I've encountered attorneys that are clearly sub-average and do not have the diligence or the abstract thinking, that big picture thinking, to understand how they should utilize the services of a forensic psychologist or even totally appropriately represent their client. So what I believe is that we have to find ways, whatever those may be, to allow people to get their true day in court and to be represented as that person. And we can have little cases, Andre. We could talk on this podcast about smaller situations, in quotes, less serious, but they really are serious, because once you're convicted of a felony, that stays on you forever. Or really serious situations, which I spent a lot of time doing, which is death penalty mitigation, is, capital work. So you ask, what do attorneys need to know? Attorneys, I believe, need to know two things. They need to know that, well, three things: that there are services out there that they should ask for and utilize, and many of them do not. I have a case right now where my service has been asked for. I've done a minimal amount of work, and the attorney has decided, and he is the boss, that he is going to negotiate a plea, that all of this woman's trauma and everything is just useless to hear. The DA doesn't want to hear it. A jury won't care. He's going to plead her out. He thinks he's a hero because she didn't get the death penalty. In my view, there's a broader range of things. I believe that she has a diminished capacity because of what she's been through in her life. I believe that there may be lesser included offenses besides what she did, the murder. But there's attorneys who do not want to either take the time or don't want to educate themselves. If you do that, miracles can happen. I've been involved in cases where miracles can have happened. And they may be small miracles. They may be someone who's going to get the death penalty, who's killed several people, and they get life in prison. It may be someone that is facing 40 years, and instead of getting 40, they get 10. 10 years is a long time. But if you went to a surgeon and said, either I can save you 30 years of your life, you would definitely send me chocolate chip cookies. Okay. You got to look at it like I'm a surgeon. If I come there and say, instead of spending 30 years locked up, you're going to spend 10 years locked up, you're giving somebody 20 years of their life, giving them the life that God gave them. You're giving them 20 years. That's huge. So what do attorneys, the three things: you have to be smart enough and aware enough and have the diligence to utilize somebody. You also have to find the right person. And there's always the right person for a particular situation. And you have to make demands. You have to know what to expect and what you should demand and expect for your client. So anybody can find a forensic psychologist. If right now somebody commits a crime and they go to federal court and they have to have a fair sentencing, that federal attorney can find a psychologist who does some forensic work almost in any big city. There's always somebody who does some sentencing stuff or competency or whatever, and they could write a very boring report. They can say, I'll compliment you here, Andre. They can say, Andre Jacobs is I don't even know how old you are, Andre. Doesn't matter. No. Andre Jacobs is a 38-year-old handsome African-American male with a ready smile. What does that mean? Okay, what does that mean? The point of it is that he has a ready smile because although he committed this crime, he has tremendous potential and has overcome incredible painful things in his life. And that this crime was an anomaly. It's not really characterizing of him. We have to look at the situation and we have to understand this person as it relates to the prongs of the law. So, like in the federal courts, what's a downward departure? It's a situation where that behavior and that offense is not typical of that person's functioning, and there's mitigating reasons why they engage in that. You could have a mother who needed money because she's ill. You could have felt pressure from an older brother who was the only person in your life because your parents never took care of you. There's many, many, many reasons why people commit offense behaviors. And the judicial system needs to be aware of those things. So you need to be creative and you need to pull together, Andre, all of these diverse pieces. So these formulaic reports that just go presentation, history, this is the conclusions, doesn't really give the trier of fact any information that tells that person's story. And that's where the trick comes in, because you've got to stick to the guns. You can't just go off and say anything, but you can tell a psycholegal story that has passion, that has a history, that has meaning, and addresses true psychological issues that the trier of fact can use in the decision-making process. And it's not easy to do. Yeah.
So, what about like financial issues? Like, can everybody afford Dr. Brahms or, that kind of service?
Money is an issue. Money is
an issue.
Yeah, money is continuing issue. And when you find people at my level, we do charge for our services. Now, obviously, it depends. In most cases, I charge by the hour, and most people at my level, I've been doing this for 39 years. And at this point, you need to say, Dr. Brahms, you look so good. How in the world could you do this for 39 years?
I was thinking that. How is this even possible?
It's just not possible. A hair dye is wonderful. And you should know when you have a chubby face, you look younger. It's true. It's very true. That's
I seen that in a celebrity magazine.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did.
What? Did he have a chubby face?
They was saying that celebrities are like adding, like a little weight to their faces, like getting weight put on their faces to look younger.
Yeah, well, I can see that. I don't have to really go make any effort to do so. It just kind of like happens, Andre. But that's another story. But yes, we do. Now, I will tell you, when there's situations like, there's all kinds of people that retain you. There's federal public defenders, there's state public defenders, there's county public defenders, there are private pay people, there's agencies. So rates can be negotiated. And lawyers who really are concerned about this have to be able to negotiate between the court system and their expert. And again, for attorneys listening to this, it's a joint effort. You have to work with the expert and say, look, I have this situation. Here's what I think about my client. Now, that's another story. I'm doing some training in about 3 weeks about how lawyers can assess mental health problems in their clients, the stepwise way of doing it. Most people don't know how to do that. That's a topic for another day. But they need to get with you. So I'll give you an example. I have a situation where there's a young girl. To me, she's young. She's 20, 22 years old, who boosted some drugs, did this for a boyfriend. She's facing real time, like 3-4 years. She has no record. She was the assistant manager at a gas station, won all kinds of awards for having the gas station, all the M&Ms lined up and all this stuff, very neat. And her life is ruined. Now, how do we get it not to be ruined? Well, she needs an evaluation for treatment in lieu of conviction. She needs mental health treatment very badly. And we would like to have a deferred adjudication where she's not going to get a felony label if she goes through certain programming. So how much money is available? Here's the problem. It's not a capital case. It's not a major felony. Why should this attorney get money? The attorney has to work with someone like me and approach the court, small county, and say, look, this is a young defendant. I talked to Dr. Brahms. We believe there's some mental health issues here that are very significant that haven't been looked at. And then I have to talk to myself and I have to negotiate with the attorney and say, look, normally I would speak to her mother, her father, her sisters, everybody. There isn't the money to do that. So what I need to do is you have to help me get all her school records, all her employment records, all of her mental health records. I will speak to her for a couple of hours. I will speak to the mom for a couple of hours. I'll speak to her stepdad, and I will write a report. And normally my fees would be this much. You tell the judge that normally it would be, I'll make up a number that's reasonable. Normally it'd be $4,000. If you can get a guarantee from the court, I will do this for $1,800. Okay. What does it do for me? I get $1,800. I'm going to I can't do this all the time. This is a huge, gigantic reduction, but it's also a very rural, very poor county. And the attorney, though, has to convince this rural judge that this is worth that amount of money. So it's a business perspective. I want a relationship with the attorney. I also care about that client. I don't know her, but the situation would make me care. And I'm running a business. So if I know this attorney and he gets me 3 of those cases a year, it's guaranteed money. Now, that sounds it doesn't really sound harsh. It's a reality. So there are ways that attorneys can talk to experts and speak to the court system. Now, if the judge comes back and says, I'm giving you $100, that's not possible. Okay. No one could do that. I would just do it pro bono. That's just a waste. But you have to look at the situation. Mm-hmm. But attorneys have to be willing to understand what that client may need, get a good relationship with an expert, understand their financial issues and the time that it takes to do a really good job, and negotiate with whoever's providing that money.
And the
That's the best I could give. The attorney has to care, and the attorney has to see the bigger picture. The attorney has to see, because in a case like this, it'll be much easier for that attorney to go to the DA in that county who doesn't want to work anyway and say, look, she's looking at 4 years. She's 22 years old. My understanding, I talked to the mom, and mom says that she's had that in high school, she tried to cut herself, and this is her first boyfriend she was with. And the DA will say, well, it's still a felony, but you know what? She could do a year. And the attorney thinks he's done a great job. The attorney is like, darn, she was going to get 4 years. Now she's got 1 year, but she will never, ever be able to get a federal student loan, live in a dorm, get a job that has any type of issues with money or security. She probably will not be able to work in the gas station she's working at. So what he's done is, yes, he's cut down the sentence, but he has never addressed the bigger picture of her life or the etiology, the origins of why she got herself into that situation. So the trier of fact is never going to know that. All of that information about her is never going to be weighed by the court system.
Addressing the symptom, but not the problem.
Addressing to the lawyer, Andre, the symptom is 4 years is too much. That's the symptom. Mm-hmm. But prison is easy for me because I can negotiate with the DA, pat him on the back. Or both of our daughters play soccer together. We're all friendly. Okay. I live in this small town. He gives me 1 year instead of 4 years, and I think I'm a big cheese. But in reality, no one has had the opportunity to weigh what happens societal wise when this little skinny girl living in this little dinky town can no longer work. Another person on welfare, another person turning to opioids, another person with a hopeless future. So we have to look at the bigger picture. But to do that, we have to start educating people who are the very young attorneys. We could talk about this forever. We talked about this. Not all attorneys are that motivated and that smart. And many of them live on a handshake, make deals because this is how they work it. But that doesn't mean that they don't need this kind of services, that their clients don't need this kind of services. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I like what you said too about like just forming a new path through the younger attorneys, the newer attorneys, and, basically hopefully getting it to a point where it's the norm to have an expert come in and, really explain like this background of these individuals, of these people.
Yes, it should be the norm. It should be the norm. Now, obviously, we're not just talking about sentencing. We're talking about competency to stand trial. We're talking about the waiver of Miranda rights. We're talking about intellectual deficiency, which obviously is important in capital cases. We're also talking about affirmative defenses, self-defense, battered women, In some states, there's diminished capacity. I know in Kentucky, there's a thing called extreme emotional distress that can be used in certain trials, sort of the mens rea, the mental state. There's many ways that forensic psychology can be used to assist the court system. Um, these are issues that, yes, young attorneys need to know. But many young attorneys, you and I are blessed because we understand the bigger picture. But when you're an attorney from a smaller law school, a smaller town, you might be a political science major. You're a fairly decent student, not great. You get into sort of a okay law school. You graduate, and where do you get a job? You're a prosecutor or a public defender in a small county. You're hardly making any money. You don't necessarily have the resources of the worldview. So I feel that my job, and I hope it's your job too, is you're right, is to try to educate people as to their role in a bigger way. That
Mhm.
their role as a societal change maker, even prosecutors. Prosecutors have a huge role and responsibility in truly changing people. And I don't think they see it that way.
Now, when I spoke at Duquesne University last week, one of the things, and I spoke about like the systemic issues that exist in the prison and in the prisons and things like
Yes.
that. One of the things that the students was asking me was, what do you think could change that? And I was
Well,
giving them my outlook from my perspective, about it. So I
what do you think
definitely
can change that? Tell me from your perspective.
for there are a lot of different things. But one of them is that people on the outside be in tune and in touch with the people on the inside.
Hmm.
Because otherwise you're getting this information from some source other than the people who are actually experiencing it.
Yes.
Like you need a direct line to these individuals to get their version of what took place or what's taking place, in order for you to even put all of that stuff in perspective, because you're always going to hear the staff's point of view, whether it's during the tour, or whether it's because their
Hmm.
spokesperson said it, or whether it's because it's put in some correctional institution, law review or something like that.
Yes.
But
You're
there's
talking
a
about being on the inside. You're talking about that people really need to know what prison is like.
exactly.
Yes.
And I mean, also there's a major accountability issue. Like the rules are not enforced against the staff members the same way that they're enforced against the prisoners.
Right.
There's a lack of accountability, and that lack of accountability breeds a certain arrogance and attitude on the part of the staff, um, that is not good for corrections. It's not good for rehabilitation. It's not good for human relations within the prison at all.
Well, it's not good. This is totally off the topic. Well, it's not off the topic of forensic psychology. What we do know is with correctional officers is there is a degree of trauma that they experience as well. And correctional officers are poorly screened. That's a huge issue. And many of them have lives that it is traumatic. It is traumatic to be locked up in a prison. They call it doing life 8 hours at a time. That's prison guard talk. Okay. Life eight, and it is life 8 hours at a time.
Mm-hmm.
We know that the people who deal with executions have lifetime trauma. There's a tremendous amount of trauma that goes along with that. So we have to deal with correctional officers, giving them a better life as well, and giving them a different perspective and different ways of dealing with people. I hate to use the word managing people, but managing an institution, how to keep being human themselves, and maybe also being change agents. But that's very, very difficult with the structure and the rules and the demands that they have to live with. I think the problem is that it's very easy to give someone a prison sentence. It's very easy to say 20 years. These are all words that prosecutors go, I want 20 years. Does anybody really, besides someone like you, understand what that means? Does anybody really understand what it means to be in a box for 20 years? And even if you're in GP, in general population, what does it mean to be in the same 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 acres for the rest of your life? The same building for the rest of your life. What are we sentencing people to, and what does that mean? And prosecutors become very, very hardened about all of that.
Mhm.
Okay. Very hardened. And when you really think about time, I mean, right now, if someone's sentenced to 20 years, I'm going to be extremely elderly in 20 years. I don't know if I'd ever see them get out. 20 years is a fortune of time. And you lived through it yourself.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, you lived for it yourself. The state
Mhm.
took away, the government took away all of these years of your life. I don't know what other punishments we have, but when we talk about the value of life, I think what forensic psychologists try to do, good ones, is within the limitations that we have and being honest and ethical for the continuation of jurisprudence. We're not going to be biased. I don't get up on a soapbox and say, no one should go to prison. There's some people who probably should go to prison, Andre. I mean, who you really don't want hanging around your neighborhood. Something has to happen. But but it's understanding the value of life, because if we don't understand that, and if we don't understand the complexity of human life, then we really don't have a judicial system. Then there's just one sentence for everybody, and you just go to jail, you just go to prison. That's it. There is no
Mhm.
weighing of anything. You don't need a jury. It's like, okay, you did this crime. Here's how many years you get.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
So you spoke a little bit earlier about trauma. Like,
Yes.
how do you explain that trauma?
Okay. Well, if the issue of trauma is central to education, pediatrics, forensic psychology, neuropsychiatry. Trauma is a concept that, Andre, for about the last 20 years, we have learned through scientific studies that when young people are exposed to trauma, okay, when young people are exposed to trauma, that there are structural and functional changes in their brain. That trauma, experiencing trauma is like the learning disability of the emotional part of the brain. The damages that happen to young people when they're exposed to one either violent trauma like seeing their mother hurt, but also the dripping faucet of trauma, the day-to-day hearing the yelling, seeing the domestic violence, living in poverty, living in fear, living in foster care, having losses. This dripping faucet of trauma has profound and negative implications upon the way a perceives the world and responds to the world. We know that in education, schools are the best schools are trauma oriented schools. They look at children who have, in quotes, ADD or, in quotes, oppositional behavior, and they're able to weed out how much of that is trauma related. And it stops the domino from happening. So when you understand that a child's brain is primed to work in a certain way because of what they've been through, and that kid gets into class and you say, "Could you please sit down, Andre?" And you're like, "I'm not sitting down." And you throw the pen at your teacher. You could say that's oppositional behavior, but it also could be protective behavior. Don't touch me on the shoulder. Don't tell me what to do, because anybody who's done that to me is going to hurt me. I have to be protective.
Mhm.
My pupils are dilated. My heart is racing. I can't think logically. All I can think about is the survival part of my brain. That's all I can think about is I have to survive. That's how these kids learn to live. So trauma-based education calms them down. It teaches teachers how to talk to them, get these kids off a cliff, and rewire their brain to be able to focus on school. So when we talk about forensic psychology and you talk about a child raised in trauma, it all is domino effect. It affects how they problem solve, how they control themselves biologically. It affects learning, which affects mastery, which affects self esteem, which affects who you're going to hang around with, which affects are you smart enough to figure out what the heck is going on when you hang around with your dudes, which affects can you control your finger on the gun, which affects how you talk to your lawyer. We could go on and on and on. But everything is this domino effect. So when you look at forensic psychology, the reason we look at a history is to understand, again, the snapshot thing, that someone's not just a snapshot, that people have histories that have to be integrated into the story that we tell.
Mhm.
Long story. The whole issue of trauma is a societal problem. It truly is. It truly is. And the trauma that you experienced being locked up, I mean, I know what you want to do on this podcast. I wonder about you, Andre, sometimes. I wonder how your brain survived the trauma of that incredible loneliness and fear and being treated like you were. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, sometimes I mean, a lot of times I think about it. A lot of times, um, I try not to think about it. But sometimes I try not to think about so much of the things that I've been through. Um, but sometimes I wrestle with the question of how did I get through that? Like
How did you?
how did it not affect me the way that how or why did it not affect me the way that it affected other people? Now I did read this study before by a doctor named Stuart Grassian.
Okay.
He's you know who I'm talking about?
I know the name.
Yeah, he's like the leading expert on the adverse side effects of solitary confinement.
Hmm.
And he said that um people with a higher level of intelligence who understand that or understand or perceive their confinement in solitary as um a response to their deeply held beliefs.
Yes. Which is what that's you.
That's me.
Hmm.
And other individuals that I've known, that these individuals they can handle solitary confinement better than people who just feel like they're just being thrown in there and there's just no rhyme or reason to to what's happening to them.
But you gave your time a purpose. You gave your time a purpose to change the system. You had a purpose. It was one heck of a purpose. You suffered greatly, but
Mm-hmm.
it was a purpose. But I find it interesting because I know that in your childhood you didn't have the type of trauma that I see in a lot of these cases. I mean, I have cases where the dad took a razor and shaved the skin off the mom in front of the kid. I mean, that type of horrendous trauma that you only hear about that on TV. And I mean, this trauma issue is something that lawyers really need to understand what that does. I also think that lawyers, while we're on this topic, and you and I could talk forever, is they have to understand the trauma of what their job does to them. Because, like, my job has traumatized me in a very unusual way. It has made me more distant. It sounds like I should be closer to people, but in my personal life, it's very easy to be distant from people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It is very easy, and it's very easy to see the world in a different type of way
Mm-hmm.
because you're always thinking about, I don't know how to put this, the unfairness in the world. You see things in a different perspective, but it's very hard to see the stuff I see every day. And people are like, how do you do this? And it's the same thing with police officers or with forensic examiners. How do you see cut up bodies all day long and
Mm-hmm.
don't really think about it?
Mm-hmm.
Emergency room doctors, they see people die all the time. What happens to you? And I have a friend, a very good friend who's an ER doctor, and he and I have long, long talks for the last 25 years. And he says, you have to like put it away. But he and I are a lot the same because we also put away our feelings.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm relating to
Yes.
what you're saying right
Tell
now
me about it.
because
Yes.
yeah, like I mean, most of the people that I grew up around in prison, I mean, I grew up in prison.
Yes.
Most of the people I grew up around in prison were, murderers, robbers,
Mm-hmm.
thieves, and, child molesters and so forth and so on. And people say, like, how do you coexist with that? Like, you're not afraid. You're not, like, you just get used to it, you
Yep.
know? You get used to it, like you said. You tuck it away. I mean, it's something that you can't control. They're there. Like you
Yes.
have to coexist with them.
Yeah.
And
But
I think I also relate to what you said earlier about like being desensitized in a way. Like the
yes.
more the more you learn about people and the more you know about people, the less you still care about the stories, you
That's
still
right.
care about what they went through, but it doesn't shock you the same way it did the first time you heard the story.
Yes. And that's why lawyers have to make sure they don't become callous. We all have to make sure we don't become callous.
Mm-hmm.
Then, I have an advantage in some ways, and I think it's important to talk about on the podcast. Not so much about me, it's about a perspective. I was trained originally as a child psychologist. I have a PhD, obviously, in both clinical psychology and child development. And I was a pediatric psychologist for the first at a university for about the first 6 years of my career. I worked before that before that for a couple of years at another institution. Then I went into private practice, and then I became a forensic psychologist. But in private practice, I saw mainly children and families until I kind of weeded out and started doing much more forensic psychology. Why is it important to have had that background? I think it's really important for everybody to understand that our clients were once children. And when a jury can understand, I mean, I have a PowerPoint I'm working on right now, and I'm sure the state's going to object, but I've got a couple baby pictures of my client because my client was once a baby. He was, he was once a baby, and he was once a third grader. I have a picture of him in the third grade, who at the same time, you saw this little school picture, his mother's being raped by his stepfather all the time. They were in poverty. He would go door to door begging for help in the middle of the night, banging on people's doors, asking for someone to take him in. But when you look at that little third grade picture, he actually looks kind of like you. I mean, he's got this sweet little face. He could be your kid. I know he's not because you were locked up, but but he could be your. Plus, you wouldn't go with his mother. Plus, he could be your kid, his sweet little boy. So understanding, I think, when you look at your clients that they were once kids and what happened to them, nobody grows up and wants to be a child molester. Nobody grows up and wants to kill people. You could start wanting to kill people when you're like 8 years old, but nobody's born wanting to kill people. Something has happened. And that's when we talk about the etiology, the origins of what happened. We talk about culpability. But we've got to talk about people understanding that our job even as a prosecutor is we have to protect humanity. Yes, prosecutors are protecting society. And if there was a serial murder out of my neighborhood, I would like the prosecutor to lock that person up. That makes sense. But when you have other offenses where you look at the issue of dangerousness and the chances of recidivism, you've got to understand that we're creating a society where you throw people away, and we think in that mentality. And one of the best things I think you can do is tell people what prison isn't. I had somebody the other day think that prison, it's better to be in prison than be poor because you get 3 meals a day and the luxuries of prison. They think you get to work out every day and have free TV and free college. People still think that.
And that's one of the things that I actually encourage people who've been to prison to talk about, and to not do so in a way that is so distant, like the way that people do in prison, like, oh yeah, I just did 5 years. It's just the most normal thing in the world, because these kids are getting an impression that, oh, it's just nothing. Some of these rappers are saying, oh yeah, prison is just vacation time. I sat down for 18 months, It was nothing, Tell the truth about what's really going on in these prisons, because that's how we got hoodwinked, thinking it was just, oh yeah, it was just jail. You go away, you do your time, and you come home, when it's not.
No, and it's your time, it's your life. And that gets into cultural things too. When I try to explain how it's a cultural issue, it's poverty, it may be ethnicity sometimes it's not. I think African-American people, Black people, white people, I hear the same stuff. I think most of it's poverty related. But it's like these guys, I could do 15 years standing on my head. Well, my head would hurt after that. Okay. And do 15 years standing on my head. I can't even stand on my head. But even if I could, it wouldn't suggest it to anybody. But this is the stuff nobody really can understand, including the public who is out for revenge, what a prison smells like and what it's like to eat that food, to see this stuff coming to you on a tray that is just plastic and scratched up and dirty with a plastic spoon and some kind of crappy looking like fake meat and 1 tablespoon of green beans. And no one can understand what it smells like, looks like. What's it like to poop in front of somebody? No one can understand what we put people through. And we have to get away from the revenge. So as getting back to forensic psychology, we have to be able to present people to the judge, to the trier of fact, to the jury, that their feelings aren't revenge. Their feelings may be, this person needs 30 years. He's 20 now. I don't want to see him till he's 50. He hurt a bunch of women. He killed some people. I can understand that. Okay. I could understand wanting to protect society, but we have to look at those offenses and we have to think about what we're really dealing with people. As you well know, the Supreme Court just came down last week that they're revoking the issues about juveniles getting life sentences. Yes.
Yeah, I spoke about that online yesterday.
Good. What did you just have to say? This is important.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what you got. basically.
Yeah, I mean, and I was speaking about like some of the guys that I know that are actually out right now that all of these advocates and all of these people put in all of this effort for, the system and the court to look at things different, to try to, give people a second chance, and that worked. And now they're just setting everything, all of that hard work and, all of those victories back.
Right.
And
You're right.
not even giving people a second chance. Even like when people made these bad decisions when they were 17 years old,
How about
sometimes
14? How about
14.
14
Yeah,
and
the guy
13?
that I talked to, he had 3 life sentences. He was 14.
Okay, so let's think about this as a forensic psychologist for a moment. Okay, we know as a fact that the brain is not fully developed until about 26 years of age. Okay. All the parts of the brain that we call executive functioning, problem solving, weighing things, reward, say, waiting for a reward. So before you're 26 and someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, Andre, I'll give you $500 now, or you can get $2,000 in 10 years." You'll be like, "Dude, I'll take the $500 now." Okay. Because you don't want to wait for that reward. That's an immaturity in the brain. Obviously, that leads to a lot of criminal behavior. "Hey, you want to go out riding right now?" "Yeah, dude, that'd be fun." Okay. It's that kind of, that's why car insurance is more expensive for a 16-year-old than a 26-year-old, because a 16-year-old will be with his friends and his homies in the car and say, "Let's go 100 miles an hour." That's why, and they'll go, "Good idea." And that's part of it. So we're sentencing people who are not even fully developed. We're sentencing people at 14 years old who generally, these crimes are the result of abuse. One way or another, they're generally killing the grandfather because you got angry at him, killing your mother because she had a boyfriend, some kind of rage-based, attachment-based type of crime. And if it's not, it has to do with this impulsivity. Let's go roll a homeless man, and the guy ends up dying. Okay, these are the types of things that happen. But the cruelty and ignorance involved in those decisions are frightening. They're really frightening, and they are also societally. They really talk about the gaps socioculturally. No rich white person, to say it this way, would ever want their 14-year-old or think it's fine for their 14-year-old to be locked up. Okay. It's a lot of this is some of it's race, some of it's money, some of it's opportunity.
I think it's a mixture of.
Yes.
I think it's a mixture of it all.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what can people learn from all of this? Like the purpose of your podcast, it's called Courtroom War. And I believe that courtrooms have become war zones. But I also think that all of us, with the skills that we have, you have incredible knowledge and skills. I have 39 years of incredible experience. Attorneys, whether defense attorneys or prosecutors, also have skills. How do we do the war that brings people to our courtrooms? That's the question. Is how do we stop the preschool to prison pipeline? That's part of, I volunteer for some organizations that deal with the preschool to prison pipeline. How do we give kids early childhood education that is not just, Andre, the ABCs, but how do we give them education that teaches them to bio-regulate, learn how to settle down, be kind to others, be inclusive, feel a sense of mastery about themselves? Those are the things that those are the preventive factors that prevent this domino effect that leads to these criminal behaviors as juveniles or adults. And we have to be able to stop that. And it's so complex. It has to do with availability of good food, of WIC program and food stamps, and the availability of childcare and good preschool education. We know that the payoff, the return on investment of not being in prison, of not being in special ed, there's a huge payoff when you invest in early childhood education.
And that also involves the parents too, right?
Absolutely. But parents, preschool education in this country is only for the rich. If you're poor and you drive around, you live in Pittsburgh, I live in Ohio. I'm very lucky. I live in a nice neighborhood, but not very far from me is a regular old neighborhood and some not so nice neighborhoods. And there's these storefront daycares, Missy's Sunny Day Daycare. They only take Medicaid. There's no outdoor playground. They're paying people $9 an hour. What kind of childcare are you going to get? Not very good childcare. And so people are desperate to find a way to work and take care of their children. And children need that attachment. They need those learning experiences. I think if you go back and look at the guys that you were locked up with, my guess is many of them don't have self-regulating skills. And I don't mean that they committed a crime, but just learning how to use their time, talk to other people. You must see that they have deficits in those areas.
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure. For sure.
Yeah.
I had deficits in those areas.
Yep.
You know, at some point. And there was some guys that I met that I felt bad for, like, yo, like, you're 40 something years old, like, tone it down.
That's right.
You know, like, you know, and it's a major issue.
Yeah. We have a lot of major issues. So the question in this podcast to anybody listening to this is, what little difference can you make? Should you volunteer on the board of a preschool? Should you try to get a tour of a prison and tell the people at your church what you saw? Should you, if you're an attorney, should you change the continuing education that you do and do something more psychosocial than just something like 5 tips how to do a bankruptcy? I mean, that's all fine if that's what you do. But if you were anything to deal with juvenile courts, adult courts, criminal courts, any of those things, how can you start learning? And there's so much out there. How do you choose your continuing education? Who do you talk to go out to lunch with somebody? I mean, I think that if someone, just like I learned so much from you, Andre, and other people, if someone went out to lunch with me, they would probably hopefully change their perspective. Can you imagine if we just had lunch, me and whatever attorney, and 6 months later he gets a forensic evaluation, not from me necessarily, on somebody who really needs it, and they either get a waiver of a sentence, or they get a lesser sentence, or they get drug court help, or they get their kids back? Can you imagine if somebody said to you, Andre, here's what I tell people. Someone lives a normal life and they work at a grocery store as an assistant manager, and that's what they do. And they help people, and the store is nice, and they go home and they do whatever, but they never really get a chance to like do something wonderful. And all of a sudden, there's an accident in front of the grocery store, and they pull someone out of a burning car and they save their life. They will think about that for the rest of their life. They ran out of the store, and scared as they were, they grabbed a blanket, they grabbed something, and they pulled this person out of the car. That's like a life-changing event. Can you imagine if everybody in our judicial system did that once in their life, twice in their life, 2 times a year, 1 time a month? I don't know how often. Can you imagine the changes that would be made if people could say, I'm doing something in a new way. I'm thinking about things in a new way.
That's like the pay it forward effect.
Yes, it is. It's like a play it forward effect. But we don't understand. I think a lot of people, including prosecutors, but also some defense attorneys, do not really understand the resources that are out there and the amazing things they can do if they just change their thinking to some degree.
I think one problem, one fear that a lot of people have is that the problems of the world are so big that little old me couldn't have an effect.
That's right. That's right.
That's when it's like you said, like the more that these different sectors of society start thinking the same way, just in terms of trying to offer something of value in whatever area that they can, the more of an impact it has overall.
And you don't have to be in the judicial system to do it. I hope that other people outside of the judicial system will listen to this. That this will have that all these podcasts you're doing will have a wider range. I'm hoping they will. But if somebody who's never been locked up, or as anyone in the family has ever been locked up, had a tour of a prison, or went out to lunch with a CO, or spoke to someone like you, and for a moment could talk to someone at church, a friend, and say, you know what, prison's really suffering. Here's this. And 2 years later, that person's on a jury. The person you had lunch with, that person might see things differently. It's getting the word out. You don't have to be a preacher. You have to be educated. It's getting the word out. I tell people about how the judicial system works, and people do. I'll tell you, sometimes at a party, Andre, or God, on a plane, when people ask me what I do, I tell them I'm an investigator. Okay. The minute I tell them what I do, the conversation does not end, because people are fascinated. How do you get into someone's head? What is it like in prison? How do you deal with these people? How do you talk to these people? How are you not afraid of these people? And my job is to talk to people about these people and how I relate to, in quotes, these people, and what, in quotes, these people are about, and how they're not these people, that they really could be us, but for some very unfortunate circumstances. And when people hear about the disparities in the justice system, the incredible disparities, not being able to pick a jury that's ethnically the same or close to that of the defendant, not having resources for a defendant to get an evaluation. I mean, yeah, we talked about money before. There's a lot of counties. I had a judge want me to do an entire capital trial for $1,500 a year of work. And the comment was, if you don't like it, go to the appeals court. But that person's already going to be on death row. Yeah. Um, Judges who when people think you go to court and get a fair trial and you get a fair hearing, it's not necessarily true. Yes. And in civil cases too, people pull all kinds of motions, but in capital cases, other federal cases, they pull all these shenanigans that are legal in the sense that they're in case law, they're in the rules of civil procedure, but do they really reach an end that's meaningful? Are these really helping to find, for the trier of fact to really hear the evidence that should be heard? I don't know about that. They're complicated issues, aren't they, Andre?
Yeah, it's real stuff. It's real stuff. I think that I feel like they said that there's the two most important times in your life is when the day that you're born and the day that you discover why you were born.
That's one of the best comments I've ever heard. What do you think about that? Who told you that? That's really great.
I heard that I'll be listening to like motivational things and stuff like that.
Podcasts. So you're doing a podcast and listening to podcasts.
I gotta try to learn my craft.
You're doing very well at your craft.
Yeah, but I believe that finding your purpose in life is one of the most fulfilling things that you're ever going to experience in life. So I think that, just like you said, a person might not necessarily be good in law or be in the judicial process or whatever the case may be,
right.
But whatever you're good at, whatever you're passionate about, offer that in a way to help, fix the plagues of the world,
That's exactly right. If you're passionate about being a manager at a grocery store, hire somebody, make sure you go to HR and hire someone who needs a second chance. Try to change the rules of hiring. Everyone's scared to hire people. So you can hire someone who has a felony. Be kind to people. Spread the word around about how to give people chances. Do something with your church or your community. There's so many things that people can do. And part of it is that if you're a well-liked person, somebody who's the assistant manager of a grocery store is probably a well-liked person. They see the public all the time. If your friends like you and your colleagues like you, educate yourself. And when you get the chance, say, what I read in the paper today doesn't seem fair. Okay, here's what I think really happened. Here's what I know. Try to change the mindset. That is the responsibility, I think, of everybody. Not to get in a bandwagon, Andre, and start yelling and screaming and doing whatever, but in your own way to share information. And it's not easy. It's not easy. I was getting my car fixed the other day, and the receptionist came out, and she knows what I do for a living, but to her, I'm in quotes a doctor, okay? And she doesn't want to get vaccinated. And I know people have different feelings about getting vaccinated, but she's like, well, I read that it's going to make you sterile, and I read that your kids are going to have learning disabilities. And I'm like, dude, your kids already probably have learning disabilities. I mean, and I can't argue. I sat there and finally I just said, I want what's best for you. Here's the facts. There are some people you just can't argue with. You're not going to win. Okay. You're not going to win. But I think that when you have some status, whether it's as a friend, friendship's a status, kindness is a status. I think that the little that I said to her about how vaccines work and whatever, hopefully she will go home and think about it. And the next time she hears something that is probably incorrect, she might be able to look at it in a different view. Yeah.
Or at least be able to remember something that you said that might cause her to question whatever they're saying or whatever they're telling her.
That's right.
Yeah, I think
That's right.
all these encounters mean something. It's just like you said, to get out. I mean, like, I love being out, meeting people, talking to
Yes, you do.
people. Yeah, I mean, it's like this one woman was like, I asked this one lady how she was doing. She was like, all right. She asked me how I was. I said, I'm great. She said, I don't hear that often.
No,
I
you
said, if you knew
don't.
my story, then you would know why I say I'm like,
Yes.
life is great.
If she had like 4 hours, she could hear your story. But I
Yeah.
saw you posted on Instagram where you spoke to that homeless gentleman. Um,
Oh
yes, the
yeah.
guy whose clothes were so ripped and everything. And
Toriano Young.
you know his name.
Yeah.
Well, that's the whole podcast. You need to have me on the podcast. Everybody who's listening to this, you remembered his name.
Yeah. Toriano
That's
Young. Yeah.
huge. And you told him that you would be there for him if he needed it. The fact that whether he came back or not, I don't know. But the fact that you said that is a life-changing experience.
Yeah,
It
he
is.
never called me though. I wish he would have called me.
Well, I don't know what's the deal with Mr. Young. I couldn't tell whether it was alcohol, homelessness. I don't know what his deal was. He obviously had a good heart.
Yeah.
Yes, and he was very sweet to you. But I'll tell you just one story before we go. A long time ago, this is 1986, so we're talking a long time ago, I saw a little red-haired boy in counseling when I was a pediatric psychologist. And it was a very simple story. He had ADD. His dad was kind of used too much alcohol. They were coming from a small town, but he was just a kid with ADD and some oppositional behavior. And I don't even remember. I mean, it was not a big deal, Andre. It was just typical ADD counseling, parenting counseling. It was just not anything important. And I remember I sent him a birthday card. There's a story behind this. This part of the story is you can no longer send birthday cards because we're so scared of being sued. It's a violation of HIPAA. So I can't even send a kid a birthday card anymore. But regardless of that, I sent him a birthday card. So we're looking 1986. About 10 years ago, so this would be like 2000, I don't know what, 10. So we're looking, how many years is that? We're looking 86 to 96 is 10 years, 96, 2006 is 20 years. So maybe about 25 years later, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I get a phone call, a collect phone call from an institution in the office. And I see so I told the office manager to answer the phone. He goes, do you remember me? And lo and behold, I remembered his name. I'm like, yeah, I think I do. So he says, I got to tell you this. He says, I'm in a halfway house right now. He says, I want to tell you, I'm however old he was. Well, he must have been 5 then. So he's like 32 or whatever he was. He goes, I've done meth. I don't have any teeth. He goes, I've been in and out of prison, but I had to call you. And I'm like, well, Michael, why'd you want to call me? I'm happy to hear from you. He says, because during all my incarcerations, I've kept your birthday card through my entire life. It was the only birthday card anyone ever has sent me. And every time I look at it, it makes me want to cry. He goes, I know that somebody could love me. And I knew that I had a future. I knew there was something.
Mm-hmm.
That is what we need. If we want to end this podcast, that's the message, is that little did I know that in 1986, sending a little boy a birthday card, I never knew he'd end up in prison. I never knew that he'd end up in multiple prisons. But the fact that he kept that voice, that love, maybe it kept him from hurting somebody, because I don't get a sense he was in there for violent crimes. I think they were drug related.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it kept him in some ways sane. Why would somebody who is in quote a criminal carry around a birthday card through God knows how many incarcerations?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Any little bit can help.
That's right.
You never know how one action could change somebody's life or save other people's lives.
Nope, you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't understand how much people need that type of love. We talk about, why do drug courts work? They work because you should get treatment for you have a drug problem, but they work because the judge loves you. They work because when you come back in that courtroom, the judge addresses you by your first name or by your first and last name and says, it's so nice to see you. I read your records. I'm so proud of you. Most people have never had that. Do I think it's the drug treatment? Yeah, I think the drug treatment helps. Do you know what I think really helps? You're coming back and see Judge so-and-so, and Judge so-and-so knows your name and thinks about you, and you want to please that person, and you want to connect because you've never had that before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that's
it's the humanity. It's
yeah.
the humanity in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which sounds like I'm dissing drug treatment programs, which I'm not. I'm uplifting the personal connection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the most important.
Mm-hmm.
I know. Well, how much do you think we can go on forever?
Well, no,
I don't know, Andre.
Yeah, no, we did a strong hour. That was a strong hour right there.
We covered a lot of topics, didn't we?
Yeah,
Now, for every listener here,
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do we say to our listeners? Should they call in and see what other topics they want to cover?
Yeah, for anybody, if you got any ideas on issues that you think we should cover on this podcast, hit me on Instagram. I am Andre97, or message me or whatever, and we'll definitely take those in consideration. I'll try to reach out and find the right people to come in here and
Yes.
share their view.
I'll come back.
Oh, you'll come back?
I'll come back.
I'm sure they'd be happy to see you.
I'll be come back. I'm happy to see you, Andre, and all your listeners. Andre is one incredible person. And I've listened to a lot of podcasts while I'm walking and doing the bike, but I will tell you, Andre's got a true story to tell, and he's got true energy. This podcast is going to change someone's life one day.
Thank you.
Okay. Andre, thanks a lot, sweetie.
All right. Take care.
Okay. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Okay.
Yep.
Bye.
Thank you for
Bye.
your time.
Thank you, Andre. Take care. Bye.
All right.